Well, good morning, and I'd like to welcome everyone to our Cook County Board of Commissioners regular meeting today, Tuesday, December 20th of 2022, our final board meeting of the calendar year. And if we'd all rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So are there any adjustments to this morning's agenda? Any adjustments to the agenda? Last call. If not, is there a motion to approve today's agenda?
Madam Chair, I'll motion to approve the agenda.
Thank you, Commissioner Spallison. Is there support?
Support.
Thank you, Commissioner Starley. We have a motion and support. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. At this time, we have our public comment period, and this is the opportunity for public to come and address the county board on any matter of county concern. When invited to speak, please come forward to the microphone and use the microphone for clarity. Sign in and state your name, address, and the topic you are addressing. Are there any members of the public that wish to speak this morning? If so, come forward. And there's a pen and a place to sign in for you.
Good morning. I'm Arvis Thompson, District 4, Colville. I wish to speak about the compensation study. I started looking at some of the underlying data used to arrive at the conclusions. Of the 20 counties that were selected for comparison, you included St. Louis County, and the comparison was valued using only one factor, that being the hospitality population. If you could explain at some point how that has any relationship to the wage comparison that we're talking about, or for that matter, how comparisons between government wages and private for-profit businesses that are based on entertainment that generate this tax, what they have in common. How does this factor into the compensation study? There are 13 counties listed in the study that give this factor importance, but it's the only factor for including St. Louis County. 2 of the 20 counties have something called rental rates, and they are part of 6 counties that use an indicator of estimated average median. Fails to say median what? Not defined. Do these 6 counties actually have any bearing on this comparison? An estimated average, that confuses me. How was that figured? Who pulled numbers from a hat for estimated averages? There are words, but there seems to be something missing in the definition here. There are 2 counties with an indicator of average sales, yet that's not listed in the factors used to select comparable counties. And how does that fit? Average sales of what? It's missing, it doesn't say. This proposal is an estimated cost of $1+ million to be covered by fund balances in the American Rescue Act and contingency funds for 2023. Were these contingency funds set aside for this in anticipation, or was something else being considered for contingency? What happens when the fund balances are depleted? What rescue plan do you expect in 2024? Where will future funding come from once these funds are used and gone? Should we expect 10% or higher budgets in the future to fund this? Who or what will you cut from the budget to cover this? How do benefit packages compare between all of these counties? Where is this report? It's not reflected in the data that was furnished at all. Does a $1 million wage adjustment include all the benefits? And I know you say it does, but I want to be sure that there is no oversight and that that doesn't come back to haunt us at some point in the future. You just did a wage study and adjustment 4 years ago, or thereabouts. Did we miss something? And how often are we going to have to do this? And these are not just pennies we're talking about. These are thousands and millions of dollars. This is not a one-time discussion like buying a bulldozer. The ongoing burden is here forever and grows by tens of thousands every year. Why can't we give this more time? We have a new commissioner starting after January 1 who brings years of public service leadership to the table. What's to be gained by pushing this through today? If this is truly needed, it will stand up to more scrutiny, research, and review. If it can't stand the test of questions and answers, then why would we be going any further?
Thank you, Arvis. Are there any other members of the public who would like to speak this morning?
My name is Lloyd Speck, and I'm here for pretty much the same thing Arvis was here. What made me come here was I couldn't understand why the latest compensation study said our employers are underpaid when the compensation study done 5 years ago said our employees ranked in the top 91% of the 20 counties then that were when they did the study. So I thought I'd research the compensation study that was just done, and this is what I found. It's apparent to many taxpayers in this county that your compensation study was heavily flawed. In the county's 2016 to 2017 compensation study, the committee sought to compare apples to apples. The comp study chose not to compare comparable counties this comp study chose not to compare comparable counties, rather counties that were nowhere near in comparison to Cook County. In fact, of the 20 counties used to compare compensation, 14 are in the top 21 highest populated counties among the state's 87 counties with a population of 1 million or more. And we've got, 5,800 in this county. The largest county used for comparison is 229 times the population of Cook County. In addition, these top-tier counties have budget revenues that exceed Cook County revenues by as much as 60 times the revenues Cook County has to support local government. This certainly is not comparing apples to apples, and in no possible scenario can be construed as demonstrating a willingness to live within our means. As commissioners, it's your fiscal responsibility to balance the organization's financial realities with employee expectations in your efforts to create compensation packages and retention strategies. Pay should be informed by competitive data as well as market conditions. You as elected representatives of the people living in this county must consider all of these factors when making decisions on behalf of taxpayers. And because there are many ways you could go with each decision, it's even more important to decide from an honestly informed position. Personal biases and unethical boundary crossing have no place in such negotiations. The Department of Minnesota Unemployment and Economic Development 2021 statistics show the average private sector hourly wage in Cook County to be $13.94 an hour. According to Auditor Brady Powers, the present hourly wage paid to Cook County employees range from $15.94 to $44.92. This does not include the cost taxpayers foot for the county's significant benefit package, which to a married employee is another $15 an hour plus. And regarding proposed pay raises for county commissioners, consider this sobering statistic. Approximately 40% of Cook County residents make less than our county commissioners. You have to be insane to think that the compensation study was a fair comparison. It shows total disrespect to the taxpayers of Cook County. This board keeps talking about how they want affordable housing. Affordable housing starts with keeping the budget down so taxes won't keep going up. This will help young families and people on fixed incomes to stay here. This administration has shown us nothing but poor stewardship of the taxpayer dollar. We have only one county commissioner on this board that tries to be fiscally responsible, and we all know who that is. There has to be a freeze on hiring. I think all you county commissioners should ask yourself, what have you tried to do or what have you done to save the taxpayers $1? We have some of you know that want a pay raise. Ask yourself, what have you done to earn a pay raise? On December 20th, 21, I sent a letter to our new administrator, James Yorkie. I sent him paperwork of all the wages given to the county employees in that terrible contract of 2018 when the levy was set at 17.45%. And they had to amend the budget on August 14th for another $378,225, which raised the levy to over 21%. The county employees got a pay raise of $992,320. They did not listen to the compensation study at that time. In that contract, we had 3 county commissioners that did not even read the contract. In the letter, I made the point to try and be fiscally responsible because of what happened to our county with the last administrator. But it looks to me like we're on the same path to destruction. James Yorkie makes $123,000 a year and he gets $30,000 plus worth of benefits. I'd like to know where he has tried or has saved the taxpayers any money. This all reminds me of when the county commissioners or our last administration wanted to put up a $6 million expansion on the jail to save $60,000. They wanted to spend $6 million. So we had to form a group to try to stop it. Not one county commissioner or the administrator could see it was a waste of money. So I think all of you should do some soul searching when you start talking about hiring and daycare center things for another $360,000 and et cetera. And taxpayers should not have to do your job. If you can't, you all should resign. Just remember, if you county commissioners vote for this $1 million pay raise, that means next year your levy actually starts at 10%, because if you do give them a pay raise, it is going to be put in the budget this year. And to me, I think that's false too, because that's part of an operating budget. And anyway, I know I'm probably speaking for nothing if nobody ever listens anyway, but I thought I'd give it one last shot.
Thank you so much, Lloyd. Are there any other members of the public who wish to speak this morning?
Good morning.
Good morning.
On this December 9th, 5 days before Christmas. And, you know, I don't have the long notes that Artis and Lloyd had. I appreciate so much their diligence. Lloyd has worked tirelessly when he's been able. He has been battling serious cancer, and many of you know it. You know what a numbers guy he is. Honestly reporting numbers. I'm thinking of what is happening in people's lives this Christmas. We have 17 in our family with children and grandchildren, and we have given in the past to each of them. And, you know, they have done the same this year. Everybody is saying, you know what? let's just bring one gift. Each of us bring one gift. Make it appropriate for a fellow or a gal, because the budget just isn't there. Food costs, gas costs, heating costs, clothing costs, necessities are going up, up, up. Inflation is rising, where we could be in a recession if things don't change in 2023. Is this a good time to be thinking of $1 million plus in a wage increase? What is happening to other people who are living in our county, trying to make ends meet, keep a roof over their head, pay the rent, pay for gas, buy food, clothe their children? Common sense says this is not the time. We have an economy in our country that is one of the worst in the whole history of our nation. Cook County is certainly being affected by it. I urge you to think long and hard about trying to save money for the taxpayers in Cook County. What can you do to keep people here? People are looking at their costs and saying, you know, I don't think I can afford to live in Cook County. Taxes going up, 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 up. What do they say when a policy holder, a public office servant, because government is of the people, by the people, for the people. And I appreciate so much each of you and the jobs that you're doing. You have run for office. When you ran for office, did you say, I want pay raises, I want this, I want that? The union looks out for the employees in this county, right? They're the ones who negotiate their salaries. Who's looking out for the taxpayer in Cook County? So, God bless each of you with a Merry Christmas and joyous New Year. We are celebrating the birthday of the Prince of Peace, and I certainly want to say this peacefully, but do as you are urged. Do some soul searching. Okay? Thanks so much.
Thank you. Are there other members of the public who wish to speak this morning?
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Bob Thompson. For those that don't know me, I come before public comment today as an employee of Cook County, and I want to speak to the compensation study that's being voted on today. I was part of the working group, and I can just speak to that briefly, that I feel like the process was well thought out. We had a number of committee members providing insight in landing on how we chose our metrics, and I'm sure Commissioner Mills will elaborate a little bit further on some of the questions that we heard during public comment. But what I really want to ask today is, based on some of the discussion I heard a week ago during the commissioners' meeting when this was introduced, and I would just ask that if there is a progressive or partial implementation of this compensation study, that implementation is strictly related to our levies, and that it's not partial or gradual implementation into the actual payroll table. I think that the way that recommendation plays out is somehow through fund balance or other funds. and gradually reducing that as a portion to slowly introduce this impact into the levy. I think we have a pretty healthy fund balance. I know Brady's going to go over that later in the agenda. One other thing I just wanted to mention briefly is, the income was something we discussed in the 2017 comp study. It is something we discussed in this current study, is the income in Cook County. And I don't know that that is always a very reliable metric, because clearly there's an influx of wealth into this county and second homeowners and people who own multiple properties. They live somewhere else, or even people who live in Cook County and own multiple properties within the county. In saying that, I feel like our benchmark communities were well thought out and are reliable data points for this study. I did do some research. The most recent data you can find statewide from a reliable resource, which is the Department of Revenue. They have a statistics webpage for property taxes, and 2021 is the most recent data they provide on there. And of the 21 counties, including our 20 benchmarks, Cook County ranks 15th in the effective tax rate of those benchmark counties. And if you look at specific to residential homestead effective tax rates, we are the third lowest of the 21 counties. I do have this sheet available if anybody wants. I can send it over to them, or I can even go make copies and bring back to you guys. But this lays out the 2021 effective tax rates for various property categories. It also lists the average assessed value of all of these counties at the 2021 assessment, in which Cook County ranks number 10 of the 21, and only 5 of the counties that have a higher effective tax rate have a lower property median home or average home value. So those are just a couple of things I wanted to point out. I know we have, like I say, a healthy influx of very wealthy property owners that make up the majority of this tax base. And I guess that's part of what I think the board should be looking at and taking into consideration. I think that this compensation study makes Cook County very competitive in the market, and I can personally speak to, if this was implemented, it would go a very long way in retention. Thank you all.
Thank you. Are there other members of the public that wish to speak this morning?
Hello, my name is Andrew Beavers. Been a resident of Cook County since 2005. I sat on the Lutzen Township Board for over 6 years, served my community, and I feel like I'm serving the county now in my current position here at Cook County. I think part of what's lost in this conversation about fiscal responsibility is really who the people are being affected by this proposed wage, and I'm one of them. I'm the human interest story, so to speak, that I chose to make my living in Cook County. I started as a bartender and a food and beverage manager at Lutzen Resort, picked up second jobs to do my activities, golfing at the golf course, and that was part of the choice I made. My house that me and my wife live in and have lived in for 15 years is well below the $345,000 average price in Cook County, and I think that's reflective of what we need to keep in perspective here as far as what the actual effects on the community are. We don't own multiple parcels of land. We don't have a vacation home. This money is absolutely necessary to help folks like me create that better life and a continued lifestyle of enjoyment on the North Shore. And it is, I think, a well-founded study. I sat on the comp study for the last couple months of it, and the work that I saw being done was in my opinion, no way skewed. It was valid. We used expert opinions, and if you can't trust the experts, who can you trust? I would just like to say that, yeah, I'm one of the people that is here saying that this comp study is a valid study, and I absolutely believe it will help the employees of Cook County better live their lives and better serve the county as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there other members of the public who wish to speak this morning?
Hello, my name is Bob Matson. I live in Grand Marais, 114 11th Avenue West. I never really paid much attention to this compensation study until I read it in the paper. I kind of looked at it a little different way, I guess, since a lot of people, I have no idea which counties you used for our survey. So I pulled up the state of Minnesota map of the counties and their population, and I came across the density figures, and I found that interesting. So I took the bottom 10 counties, population-wise, that were around Cook County, and the density figure for Cook County is 4. Lake County to our south is 5. Well, I could see comparing there. St. Louis County, the density factor is 8 times, 32. You go a little bit further down the road to Carleton County, they're 10 times our density. I looked at that as, these are the people that absorb your tax rates. So that's where I come up with, I'm not, like I say, going back, I have no idea all the counties that you use in your survey, but the larger counties, I think, are totally erroneous to be comparing us to because of the one thing, the density factor. So that's where I was looking at. Then my next thing is, I saw that you've got you're going to absorb the $1 million increase for this year with your contingency fund that you have left over, $187,000, and next year you're going to go to use the American Rescue Plan active $820,000, which makes the whole process, I guess, fairly painless. But what's going to happen the following years? To me, you're kicking $1 million can down the road. And when the time comes, who are you going to look at? The 4 people per square mile that live in Cook County. I'd think about it a little bit harder.
Thank you. Are there other members of the public who wish to speak?
Everybody that's come up and talks about studies and this and that, and I don't understand why you think it's that complex. The long and short of it is you're spending 4 times what our income is. Can you do that at home? And as far as how the public employees are getting by in this county, I've had to tell my kids all the time, they say, Dad, why do they have that? We can't have that. I said, well, they got public employees, they got all the money in the world. Your job is to get us back to where you're spending what we have to spend and not 4 times that. I think you did that, you'd solve a lot of problems. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there other members of the public who wish to speak? Any other members of the public? Last call. All All right, we will close our public comment. at
Madam
this
Chair,
time.
we do have a written comment
Oh,
from a
you do have some?
constituent.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes, I received comment from the West End. And good morning. She said she would be here, but because of the weather, she sent me her thoughts. My name is Catherine Johnson, and I live in Schroeder, Minnesota. I was made aware yesterday that the county board is planning on giving a substantial raise to county employees and a significant increase to county board members. Due to such a short notice and it being Christmas week, I'm not able to attend, but wonder if this was by design, being that a lot of people are busy during the holidays. I do not support this increase in wages for county employees or a wage increase for the county commissioners. County employees and county commissioners are already well paid. To put the burden on county residents during a tumultuous financial period in the United States is simply egregious and quite frankly self-serving and out of touch. The county commissioners have an obligation and a duty to the taxpayers to ensure our tax dollars are spent to the best help those living and working and paying taxes in this county. This is just a tidy little Christmas gift for the county employees and commissioners. I urge you, Jenny, along with other board members, to vote no on this proposal. If you have any interest in getting working-class people to move to Cook County, taxing them to death is not the way to do it. Sincerely, Catherine Johnson from Schroeder. That's all I received.
Thank you, Commissioner Storley. Administrator Yorkie, do you have remarks you've received?
No, that was the only written comment that I saw.
Okay. Other commissioners, anything that you've received?
Nope.
Okay. We'll now close the public comment. Thank you. All right, we'll move on to our consent agenda items. And is there any item that a commissioner would like to pull this morning? Any item a commissioner wishes to pull? If not, I'd entertain a motion.
So move.
Thank you, Commissioner Storley. Is there support?
I'll support.
Thank you, Commissioner Swallison. We have a motion and support. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. We're on to item 4, recognition of departing board member. Administrator York.
All right. Well, Commissioner Swalson, these last couple of years have passed by very quickly. Have really enjoyed working with you, have really appreciated your guidance and leadership in our union negotiations and your calm and steady voice here at the dais. You always have added so much to discussions of this board, have really helped, I think, put things in perspective for both the board and the public. So really grateful for your leadership and sorry to see you going.
Thank you.
And we have a small parting gift for you.
Okay. Thank you so much. And I do want to thank the voters in District 1 for this opportunity, and it's been my honor to act as your representative on the board. I've always listened, and I've tried to do what I believed was correct for District 1 and the county. I certainly want to thank those here that have been patient and listened and helped me understand different issues as we've gone through, and also the staff who generally made me look like I knew what I was doing before I really did. So I do appreciate all of that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. You will be missed. All right, before we get all teary-eyed here, we're going to move on to the Highway Department. Robbie Hass. Good morning, Robbie.
Good morning, everyone. Let's see. So the first thing we have on there is the DCP agreement with MnDOT, Delegated Contract Process. What that is basically if we get money from the federal government, it allows MnDOT to accept that on our behalf. That's kind of the short of it. That's kind of how it sets up. MnDOT, helps us facilitate those funds and use them on projects locally here in Cook County. it's kind of interesting that this has come up when the next two things we're talking about are federal sources of money. There's a project we're doing this summer that is a federal project. It's federal money, so this is a very common thing. It's a pretty cookie cutter agreement, I guess. We do them, I think they do them annually, but it basically allows MnDOT to act on our behalf to accept federal funds. It's kind of the short of it. So is there any questions?
Any questions for Robbie? If not, I'd entertain a motion.
I'll make the motion to approve the agreement and adopt the resolution.
Thank you, Commissioner Solison. Is there support?
Support.
Thank you, Commissioner Storley. We have a motion and support. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you. This next one probably looked really familiar, not only for the acronyms being very similar to last week's, but the project itself. And you might be asking yourself, why? So there's, like we talked about last week, there's two of these kind of transportation alternative or trail-focused grants that are available out there. The one that we talked about last week was the AT program, Active Transportation, that's through the state. This one is the TA program, is the Transportation Alternatives Program, and that's through the federal government. The reason I'm putting this grant resolution forward is kind of some information came out of a district meeting where it sounded like there was a lot of people, a lot that were pursuing the AT grant, and not quite as many pursuing the TA grant. And so I figured, why not throw our hat in the ring for both of them? And if we get one, then we can ignore the other, and vice versa. But the idea is the same. When it's a federal grant, though, in this case, there is an 80-20 split on funding. And so whereas the state-funded grant, they just kind of set a maximum for what we could ask for. So in that case, I think it was $500,000. On this one, it's an 80-20 split, meaning 80% of the project can be federally funded, 20% has to come locally. And so in this particular case, the grant would be for $440,507, and the remainder would come out of, like I mentioned last week, our municipal state aid construction account. Are there any questions regarding this one?
Seeing Commissioner Storley, you do it.
I don't have any questions. I just want to thank you for looking at all these alternative grants and taking advantage of them and say, well, maybe that shouldn't be one we want. We'll go for this one. And, over the last few years, you have really had in mind the fact that we have a lot of roads that need updating and culverts and all of that goes along with it. And along with the Tofty Park Road, may I say, I've written that in my Christmas card to my friends who are winter birds. The Tofty Park Road will be redone in 2024. So it's just an example of the great work that you and your department are doing.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments? Is there a motion?
I'll make the motion to adopt the resolution for the Transportation Alternatives Program grant.
Thank you, Commissioner Svallison. Is there support?
Support.
Thank you, Commissioner Hawkins. We have a motion and support. Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you. So this last one, and I'll give a lot of prefacing before we talk about it too much, is IIJA raise grant, and there's kind of two prongs to it. One is I come and ask for a letter of support from the board, and then the other one is actually I'd like to work with the board to solicit our legislators for support. I think you guys know them better than I do, so. But no, we had a visioning session last Thursday, was it? Up at the community center and then also online. And, despite there was some people were kind of making fun of me for it because that morning it was a blizzard and weather was not, we had issued a no travel advisory. And then, later that day we have an in-person meeting after we had issued that no travel. And so, I was kind of asking around the office if we ever cancel no travel advisories, and we don't actually. Historically, we don't. And so I'll take a little flack for that. That's fair. I get it. But we had, I think, wonderful turnout. I had, when we were up at the community center, we had close to probably 20 people in person, and then online, I think it was almost 50 people. And that's wild. Yeah, that was amazing. And to kind of get into the grant a bit more, there's the concerns that I've heard is when you hear lots of money, the gunflint, and infrastructure, people get scared. People think we're going to blow through a 4-lane highway from here to the end of the trail. And, I tried to make it clear at the beginning of the presentation, and I'll make it very, very clear now. 95% of this project is basically just resurfacing. It's a housekeeping project. The pavement in some sections of the gunflint is frankly embarrassing, in my opinion. The end 10 miles of the trail between the 92s, those specifically come to mind of just terrible, terrible. It's a safety issue too, for the people that use it. And so, realistically, what this project is going to be is, I think we're proposing 27 miles of resurfacing. There's over a dozen culverts that need to be replaced. The resurfacing that happens is just putting back what's there. It's 11-foot lanes, 2 to 4 foot gravel shoulders now, and that's what's getting put back, is that. There's a very small portion of this project that I think is causing the most controversy, if you want to think of it that way. And it's the discussion about pedestrian facilities, in the mid-trail area and maybe even at the end of the trail. And I think, it was interesting when I kind of had my debrief with our team, after the fact that led the online portion versus, how did it go for the in-person part of it. And almost two different experiences where, coming out of the in-person experience, and the advice or the feedback that I heard from people was positive about it. And I think it's because I had a chance to talk about exactly what this is, and really the things that are up in the air right now are very, very small compared to this project as the whole. And online, I think it's a little harder to facilitate sometimes that conversation. Sometimes that can get lost. And I'll apologize if anybody, if it wasn't clear what this project was. So, the next meeting we're going to have for this is going to be towards the end of January. Incorporating all that feedback is kind of a big lift from the first meeting to the next one. But then the nice thing is once we have that meeting, the second to the third one, it's just kind of tweaking, going ahead what it's going to look like. Yeah, I hope that was clear as mud. I guess if you want to talk about it, I'm happy to explain more if there's other areas. We're talking safety improvements at intersections. You think of the 55s where it touches it twice, County Road 60 there. It's kind of a parking lot. It's not a nice squared up intersection. And so, that's part of it. It's, do we want to incorporate a left turn lane in front of Headstrom's coming down the hill? Stuff like that. But the goal is, any changes, if there are any changes, it's incorporating the change and minimizing impact. I don't want to blow through a corridor. I know how important the gunflint is to people up here. There's, the historic and the scenic byway folks, have made it very clear how important that is. The community has made it very clear how important that road is. And, it's not going to be a highway. I'm not doing that. Most of it's just resurfacing, culvert work, safety improvements. I guess I would entertain questions at this point.
Any questions that commissioners have? Commissioner Storley.
Thank you. Well, that would be good, Robbie, if you could get all that information put together by the end of January, because we go to our legislative sessions in February, the second week in February.
Okay.
And maybe even some photos, if you could, because we have a new representative for our area, and we need to bring him up to speed with a lot of information, I'm sure, but this would be one of them that would be important. So as much as you could put together, then we'll take it when we meet him.
Happy to.
Absolutely. I also would just say, having spent a lot of time with lake associations this summer and the Mid-Trail Properties Association, and a number of groups, that there's been a lot of discussion about safety and different kinds of enhancements that could really improve the mid-trail area, but this spans the entire gunflint. Again, like Robbie said, dealing with the 92s, looking at the end of the gunflint and the repavement there, and the addition of the culverts. One thing that was talked about is, with some of that money, after all those big pieces are done, looking at things like maybe some kiosks in areas where there are pullouts, having opportunities to educate the public about the Gunflint Trail, about its history, invasive species, a number of different things. So anyway, those are the types of other things that could enhance and be added to this type of project.
I'm happy you brought up the pullouts. That was an interesting thing that came up of a overwhelming majority, I would say, of people were very in favor of additional pullouts, which wasn't even on my radar, and that's what I really appreciated hearing from folks was that kind of stuff. You know, I can see where the pavement's bad. I know which culverts are bad, but it was that kind of information that I was really hoping to get out of this discussion, and we did, which I was happy for.
Precisely, and I think one of the comments made at the meeting was, where else do you drive where there isn't an opportunity to pull out for whatever the reason might be? And so it was interesting to see the number of people that did want to try to increase and put a few additional ones there. Commissioner Swallowson.
I want to echo the comments earlier. Really appreciate how you've gone aggressively after grants. I know through our former, engineer in your position, we've gotten a lot of help from others out there that, support our area, but it's your work that's really been key to pull these grants in and do these things. Your focus on the infrastructure improvements, particularly our bridges, in improving the safety of these, very important infrastructure here, and the fact that you've been able to leverage the grants to set up just the designation of some of the roads, which brought us in more funding and these types of things to improve those things. It's absolutely noteworthy, and I wanted to just not leave this position without telling you, I really appreciate what you've done for the county and your continued work in that. Anytime you can improve the infrastructure and keep after that and keep things on budget as you're doing them, that's outstanding work. So thank you.
Thanks, Bob. We'll name
Commissioner
a bridge.
Hawkins.
We'll name a bridge after. Commissioner, I'm sorry. Commissioner Swallowson. Sorry.
So I'm wondering,
Yes.
when we hear, if we get this, how long between that point and potential construction?
It's quite a ways. It's interesting where it's almost a hurry up and wait scenario where, this grant, we're doing a lot between now and it's due February 28th. So it's a really short turnaround. What was interesting is last year when I did it, we had until April. And so they cut 2 months off to get this thing submitted again. But they wouldn't, I don't think funds obligate, or basically we can't do construction. I think it's until 2028. It's quite a ways out. And so what I think too is important, like that's a long time, but it's kind of nice because what we're doing, what we're proposing is preliminary. Is most of this, most of it we know, like I said, with the resurfacing stuff, it's 11-foot lanes, 2 to 4 foot gravel shoulders over most of it. If it's identified, at the next meeting, we come up and say, hey, we think, we heard some things about a wider shoulder towards the end of the trail to help with people walking and also facilitate better drainage and trailer drift. Well, maybe there's, a 1 or 2 foot paved shoulder at the end then. But that's what we're still working on. That's the whole idea behind public input is I'm coming forward with, I think, something that's, 95% done. Now tell me what you think, and we can incorporate that stuff. But yeah, so 2028, which, where I was going with that leaves us 6-ish years to really detail the thing and see what we want to do. So lots of time.
I'll just share what I shared with Robbie earlier. My biggest concern with this whole thing is I don't always think that MnDOT, state standards, federal standards are appropriate for Cook County.
Sure.
We are a rural county. I like the feel of our rural roads. And I think I was on the online portion and there was feeling of concern that we're going to make that fit state standards and make it like every other road. So I encourage people to submit your comments to Robbie about your, get involved, show up at the meetings.
Absolutely.
And make your opinion known of how do we want Cook County roads to look.
Absolutely. No, you're totally right. And I think with the Gunflint especially, and, the county as a whole too, but, since we're just talking about the Gunflint is, we know it has the historic designation, it has the scenic byway designation. And so, protecting those has been made very clear to me that is like priority number one, maintain kind of the feel of the trail. And whether you sit on those committees or, just enjoy the Gunflint itself, that's what I've heard is that, there's variances that do exist in the state and the federal government where we can say, if we look at traffic counts and say, according to the traffic count, it's supposed to be, by state standard, a 12-foot lane and a 4-foot paved shoulder, but we look at it and say, well, because of right-of-way constraints, the feel of the road, and cost, or something like that, we say, well, we're proposing an 11-foot lane and maybe a 1-foot shoulder and a 3-foot gravel shoulder or something like that. Most of the time those things go through if we're justified in it. A lot of times right-of-way costs can blow out a project. And so, that's something in just my limited experience I've heard they don't want to get in the way of is that type of stuff. So if it's our desire to have something that's a little more narrow, or that I'll just say doesn't meet state standards or federal standards, and we can justify it, in my experience, it shouldn't be an issue.
Other questions or comments? If not, I'd entertain a motion. Would someone like to move that we would write the letter and solicit support for the raise grant?
I'll make the motion.
Thank you, Commissioner Svallesen. Is there support?
Support.
Thank you, Commissioner Storley. We have a motion and support. Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Auditor Powers.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So in discussing the compensation study last week, there were questions about use of our fund balance, if that's needed. So I wanted to clarify the policy the board made a couple of years ago. First of all, that the general fund, the goal is to have at least a 75% current unassigned fund balance based on current expenses, which current expenses just means not some large capital improvement, just our ongoing current expenditures. The highway fund, an assigned fund balance of 60% of current expenses, and PHHS, an assigned fund balance of 40%. So those are goals. The terminology might be a little confusing. It's just in state statute, anything left over in the highway department and PHHS is considered assigned. It's just it's a required terminology. But for us, it's the same as the unassigned in the general fund. It's there primarily, it's left there for their cash balance needs. But if it gets excess, it's there for the county board. So, but this is not a prohibition, let's say, of using it. These are goals. Where the board 2 years ago put in, let's say, a trigger was over the combined fund balance of those three major funds, and said if the combined fund balance of general, highway, and public health human services drops below 75% of their combined expenditures, current expenditures, then and only for one-time expenses and with explicit public acknowledgement and a plan for restoration of the fund balance to at least 75% again in the following year or whenever the plan. So it just requires you to consider it and that it's one time and you're going to put it back. So other than that, it allows the use of fund balance to fund current expenses during budget preparation when that combined fund balance exceeds 75% and doesn't cause it to drop below 75. It's just there for your consideration without having to make a plan. Keep it above 75. So So we base it basically on our audited numbers, because that's when we get a really defined number. It's the only time. So we have the 2021 audit that gives an unassigned fund balance in the general fund of $9,594,680, and that's 88% of current expenses, so well over the 75%. It includes those things that we talked about last year. They hadn't been audited and put into this yet. It gives us an excess of about 1.4 million over the 75%. Cash balance, I don't go into any detail, but the trend for 2022 is positive. We can see that our revenues are exceeding our expenses. That's as far as I would want to go with that until we do all of our adjustments in year end. But it is trending in the positive way. Now, for the combined fund balances, per the 2021 audit, we're at $18,311,832, which is about 98% of those current expenses. That excludes highway construction. That's not a current. So capital, including highway construction, that's the big item. So equal to 75% is $13,950,000. So excess of that 75 million is about 4.3 million as of 2021. We don't know 2022, but the cash tells us we're trending positive. So it probably isn't going to be, let's say worst case, much less than that, and probably a little more than that. So that just gives you a kind of a basis for the discussion and whatever you have to do.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. All right. Item B, the compensation study working group recommendation.
So, Madam Chair, if I could, I just want to, for folks who are watching online, and because we do have folks in the room today who are concerned about this item, just wanted to talk briefly about the process that has brought us to this point. So back in February, the board directed my office to undertake a process to conduct a compensation study to determine if our salary structure was competitive with the market. We contracted with David Drown Associates to undertake that study, and we created an internal working group to discuss factors that we wanted to use in selecting counties for the study. And that group considered, there was actually a lot of discussion, and Commissioner Mills can attest to this, a lot of discussion about what those factors should be. But the starting point of the discussion was not what county should we choose, but what factors are most important to us in considering what counties we would want to use for comparison. And so the factors that we settled on, as have been referred to earlier, median home value, median household income, county government expenditures per population, rental rates, and then hospitality tax collected per population. These factors were selected because they were felt to be the kind of the key factors that determine what wages are in this county, or what they should be. So those were the factors that we selected. We did come before the board in August to share information about that selection of factors. There was a presentation by David Drown at that point, and the board had the opportunity to ask questions about the process and about why we chose the factors that we did. So that was the discussion before there was any talk about here are the counties that we're going to use. It's really what factors do we want to use to select counties. And so after that, the board agreed to move forward, and so we did task David Drown with selecting counties based on those factors. And the ones that were selected, the 20 or so that are in the list, are the ones that we used. And those form the basis of the data set that was used to look at comparable wages. So one thing to be really clear about, this process has been open. There have been ample opportunities along the way for the board to ask questions, for the public to be involved. And the working group I just want to recognize the great work that it's done, because there's been a lot of really good discussion, a lot of time and thought was put into this. And so David Drown came back with the information that you have before you today. And the question really at this point is, how should we use that information to make changes, if any, to our wage structure? And you've heard perspectives this morning on what that should be. From my perspective, I heard conversation about the cost of implementing this pay scale, and there's no question there is a cost associated with it. There's also a cost associated with having a substandard wage structure that produces higher turnover than is necessary. And there's a lot of cost associated with having people coming and going from the organization. So far this year, we have had 25 people leave Cook County government. That's 1/5 of our workforce. And so I want to point that out, because when somebody leaves the organization, they take with them knowledge and expertise, knowledge of our policies and processes, and they also take relationships. And so when somebody leaves the organization who's been doing a job for a long time, it takes time, number one, to recruit somebody, and then also to train them up. And we've had to do that 25 times this year. And that's no small thing. In fact, our HR staff has been doing nothing but, onboarding, offboarding, advertising positions, setting up interviews. And that's really, they don't have time to do anything related to long-term planning, because it's really just monitoring the revolving door that we've experienced. And I'll say this is not unique to Cook County. I mean, employers across the country are seeing this. But we do know that, as was discussed in the Public Health and Human Services Board meeting earlier this morning, we do have a lot of turnover, and we know that we're losing staff not only to local and regional employers, but really to national employers. The increasing prevalence of remote work and the ability of people to work for a large national employer from their home here in Cook County is increasing all the time. And that's what we're competing against. And so I understand the perspectives that were discussed earlier in this meeting, and I have a lot of respect for you coming in here today and sharing your views. And I don't disagree. It is a burden to put on the taxpayers. I get that. But again, there is a cost to not taking some kind of action here. And so I just want to, again, recognize all the great work that our working group has done, and I appreciate the difficult decision that this is for the board.
So there were a number of questions about the metrics that were chosen. Commissioner Mills, do you want to talk a little bit about how those metrics were arrived at?
Yeah, and
that might help the public.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Administrator Yorkie. That was probably the trickiest part of the whole discussion. What determines what makes Cook County comparable to other counties? And so the group as a whole were asked for any and all thoughts about what makes Cook County unique, how would you compare Cook County to other counties, other communities, and as a very robust discussion, we all came from different angles, and then all ranked our choices for what we thought made Cook County comparable to other counties, and you can see the factors as the median home value, the median household income, expenditures per population. We didn't want to do just expenditures. One member of the public mentioned density, and that's a very important factor. So we wanted to use a ratio of the amount that Cook County government spends to population. So that was that third one. The next one was rental rates as a factor. As we're looking for employees, we're trying to compensate employees fairly. that was a big factor, much like median home value is. And then the hospitality tax to population is another factor. And again, that's a ratio. We're not looking at just how many dollars are brought into the community, but per population, what does that look like? Because hospitality is a huge factor for our community. It's the biggest factor. Our community is really dependent on tourism, and that has a huge impact on government operations. It has a huge impact on home values, property values, and just the culture that we have, and the accommodating culture that we need to provide. And so using that as a ratio of hospitality tax to population was agreed to paint another picture of what other communities around the state have that similar culture and dependency on hospitality. Now, after we selected those, we all agreed that they don't all have the same weight. They don't all have the same importance. And so we thought about what has the greatest importance as far as the factors were concerned, as far as recruitment and retention were concerned, and how we compare other counties. And so the list I just gave you was ranked from 5 down to 1. A score of 5 was given to the median home value, and the reason we thought that was because that is the biggest cost of living concern is purchasing a home in Cook County. The second one was median household income, because taxpayers pay for the compensation for our community, and we also wanted to keep our wages as much in line with the community's wages as a whole, and using that and comparing other communities like that. And then that's a weight of 4. Expenditures to population is a weight of 3. Rental rates is a weight of 2. Again, that kind of ties into cost of living. And then hospitality tax to population is number 1. So that being the lowest factor of the 5. And then our professional consultant went through all 87 counties and analyzed median home values, household incomes, expenditures to population, rental rates, and hospitality tax population, and then applied the ranked score with those factors to all 87 counties and came up with, well, I can't remember what size of the list was. It was larger than 20 because we wanted to see as many of the spread as we could, just to gauge things. And so that was the first time the names of counties entered the conversation. Before that, we were using pure just data to try to make this decision as objective as possible. Really, the values of the discussion came down into selecting those factors. As Administrator Yorkie pointed out, we approved in August. Most compensation studies use about 5 counties, 5 to 3. Most times, it's just the administration with consulting the professional, contractor to pick 3, pick 5. Who is it? This was a much more robust that included staff, included management, included myself, county commissioner, representing the taxpayers, to really try to look at what factors matter and how we should select that. There's a lot of risk when you have only 5 counties that you're comparing to. There's a lot of eggs in that basket, even more so with 3. And so as a group, we thought having a wider net there would give us a better picture. There is also a lot of concern about using the metro counties and those high population counties. Because we can't pay what they pay. We cannot afford that. That's not at all realistic. But it helped give us a picture of where the competition is, what other communities are paying, and again, using those ratios to try to make sense of it all. We talked about excluding the metro counties, and to the point of the group, what's the point of selecting factors if then after the fact you're just going to pick and choose counties? It makes the process just pretty much worthless. And so, the real intention is that those lower cost counties would somewhat balance out with that those metro counties, which again, it's comment was made, it's not apples to apples. Yeah, that's it can't ever be apples to apples. The goal is to try to get it as close to as we can, and we thought by using these factors it would give some kind of fair comparison. And our consultant said, like, no, you're never going to get apples to apples. That doesn't exist. There's no two counties in the state that operate in the same way, that have the same economic factors, the same household incomes, the same home values. So there's always something a little different with flavor. So the best you can do is just really hone in on what values and what makes you unique, and try to compare with other counties there. So that was the long and short of it. I've also heard concerns about how the implementation goes, and there's also the bigger picture about the overall cost, but just, are we picking job by job and bumping those up to what our comparable average is? And that's not the case. What we did is we plotted all the data to look at the different jobs and how they score within a range. There's a max and a min. Longevity played a significant factor in where our wages lie. We do have a number of employees that benefit from the longevity right now, and so that skews the wages a little bit there. But then we applied that chart of wages to the pay table. And so it's not necessarily position by position, it's the whole table that we're trying to adjust, and adjust it consistently and as much equity as possible. And so when you start going down the list and comparing job to job, there can be a lot of discrepancies there. But again, the goal is to get the table, get our system in place that makes it fair and equitable. We talked about, after all that, there was a number of, quite a few meetings, and again, the hardest part in my mind was determining the factors. But after all that, there was further talk about implementation. And we talked about splitting it up. We talked about this last meeting. We talked about splitting it up over multiple years. We talked about splitting it up over 3 years, 2 years. We talked about splitting it up into different classes. Only 100s through 160s get a bump this year, and then next year it's the next. But and there's lots of strategies a person can take there, but it's kind of ripping the Band-Aid off, or the further we prolong this, the more adjusting we'll have to do again down the road. It'll make it much more difficult to have a clearer picture down the road. A question earlier in public comment is, how often do you have to do this? We just did it. That's very true. Every 3 to 5 years this should be done, just to see where things lie. Every 3 years or 5 years does not have to be as robust as this, but it should be done just to see where our wages lie. If we want to stay competitive, and I guarantee you for the next 10 years, we're going to have to stay very competitive. While the boomers are retiring, the job force is not increasing, and this is our greatest risk for the next 10 years. And if our organization is not able to serve our community, that's a pretty big deal. So that's kind of the update of how we got there. Again, the looking at it regularly. If we spread this out over 3 years, we're just always going to be playing catch up. And I would like to try to stay with the market. I would like to try to stay on top of things rather than let things fall behind, and then we have to do a big bump and then fall behind and big bump. If we can set this and continue, and I know I beat this drum a lot, if we can just use the CPI as a guide for our COLA increases, I think we can bring a lot more stability to our community, to the taxpayers, and to our employees as well, and to our budgeting process. It would make things so much better rather than having these large swings dips and spikes, and that makes nobody happy. Nobody wants that. So I really believe in the long run, and that's how we have to look at things as commissioners, is the big picture, the long run, the health and vitality of our community, that making these adjustments is really important, and this process was very good and robust. We also got recognition from staff about that. They've worked in other counties, other communities. Very impressed. This is not how counties normally do it, to engage staff like that and to have it be a very open process. A lot of times staff are left out in the dark, and then they don't know what's going on, and then it just really makes for a fragmented organization. And I think the best way we can have an organization is just to have a lot of cooperation and teamwork throughout. So there you go.
Well, I appreciate that, and it was very valuable, I think, for the public to hear about that process, what it was like on the committee. And I appreciate you bringing up the fact this is something we should do as an organization regularly, every 3 to 5 years, so we don't get behind and we're staying on top of things. So thank you for that remark. Commissioner Hawkins, you had your hand up.
Yeah, wanted to ask you, you use the term ratio of spending to population instead of expenses to population. Can you explain to me how that works?
Expenses to population is a ratio.
So I have Cook County expenses to population of 6,039. I have Hennepin at 1,596. Can you tell me the relationship? How that factored in of saying we compare?
Yep. So when you went through all 87 counties, we gave that ratio of expenditures to population. And then the closest of those 87 were given that ranked score of 3. And so that went into the cumulative rank of which counties should be involved. So in Hennepin counties, that probably, going back, I would hope that ratio was not a factor in our ranking. The other factors were more of a ranked weight in that selection.
So the list, the benchmark list, is this list as presented as far as ranking? As on your chart? I'm just...
I'm sorry, I'm not
They
answering.
were rank ordered, so
Okay, so
the
this
factor
is-
at the top was the most heavily weighted.
Lake of the Woods is the most heavily rated.
No, I'm talking about the actual factors, not the counties.
That's what I'm wondering. Which counties? How did you
Correct.
decide
So-
which counties are the most important
So
to get
Lake of the
information
Woods
from?
did score the most points by the metrics that we selected. Yes, that is correct.
And so that still goes back to my point of
We had a
the
question.
data.
What's it?
Yeah,
You had a point or a question?
a question. Well, I had a question about
A
how this
pointed
is figured. Pointed question, you're right. So if Lake of the Woods is the county that most matches us in the metrics that we chose, and yet very few of the job descriptions that we use to factor in what our wage table is, I can't compute that difference. When you have, I think it's 5 or 6 metro counties for a county attorney, and you don't have Lake of the Woods there, I have a hard time saying, well, wait a minute. Molly, county attorney, you want to run for Hennepin County attorney? I don't think the jobs are the same. But yet, that's what was factored in here. So I'm still struggling with the data as presented. I will admit, when you go over to the analysis of what was presented, we do have jobs that are out of line. That's proven, and I've played around with this and changed the data, and the points still happens. We have jobs out of line, but I have said it since I got elected. I'm not in favor of our classification system. We have job descriptions that are out of date. And so the fact that we're using that and we can't find those exact positions in other counties and we get this wide thing. I did ask the Tessa at DDA, thank you for setting up the private meeting to let me ask questions. But I did say what comes first? Fixing your wage table or fixing those individual jobs so this evens out? And she said it's a chicken and the egg thing. Well, I am of a believer, fix what's wrong first. Let's take a look. Let's make sure that the jobs that we say we have, that we're comparing, are really comparable in other counties before we say, yeah, we're going to compare it to Hennepin County. So I'm still struggling, but I do appreciate the work of the working group. I agreed with originally the whole 20 counties and looking at this. I thought it would give us a really balanced view. But when I look at the raw data, and very few Lake of the Woods counties positions are in here, I want to take a step back and say, wait a minute, let's make sure our data is right. And the fact public has only really got this data for a week, I get, could have asked for it, but it was just presented. I'm kind of, wait a minute, let's think about this. Let's make sure we're doing it correctly.
Commissioner Mills?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Commissioner Hawkins. There's quite a few points there. The first one that I wanted to clear up is because Lake of the Woods County ranked at 13 does not mean it has a higher weight in those 27 or 20 counties. All 20 are put together, and then it's used as an average for kind of comparing at. It's not like Lake of the Woods is the highest, so we give the most weight to Lake of the Woods counties.
No, but don't.
So if you're saying we don't have enough for Lake of the Woods, it doesn't matter. What matters is if we have enough positions for all of them to get some kind of a picture. It's not a pick and choose sort of thing. It's a conglomerate that you try to, and that's the most objective way to do it. Otherwise, when you start picking and choosing, then you're just picking and choosing.
And if I could, Commissioner Hawkins, you're exactly right about the job classifications. That is something that we need to work on. It's one of those things that because we have had so much turnover, ordinarily that's something that we would do internally. We've had no capacity to do that work, and that's why we're going to be contracting with David Drown to assist us in getting caught up, because that is a real need. And you need to have both. You need to have both the market analysis, and you need to make sure that your job classifications are up to date so that you can correctly slot those in. So that's a really good point.
Mm-hmm.
Commissioner Storley?
Thank you. So does it make a huge difference in the job updating? Like how many job reviews would we need to do?
The plan is to do all of them over the next 3 years. And we would prioritize, there are certain job descriptions that we know are more out of date than others. And so we would prioritize doing the most out of date ones the first year and then work our way through until after 3 years we've done all of them.
So a compensation would be there for them even though their job description would be in review?
Correct. The pay table, the way this would be done is the pay table would be updated, and then we would go through and do the classification analysis, which could result in positions being moved up or down, depending on how far out of line the actual job is with the description.
Commissioner Mills?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Another point I wanted to make is that, it's a good description Commissioner Hawkins made that Tessa would give as the chicken egg situation, right? We got to do one or the other. We got to do both, honestly. I would like to point out that there are 35 170 positions. Odds are, when we go and do those job description reviews, a good number are going to be moved upward. Some could be moved down as well. But it's as I've expressed before, a little suspicious that there's so many 170. James doesn't like this.
I'm not sure that's true.
Okay.
I don't.
I'm making an assumption.
Right.
No.
I mean, I wouldn't want to create an expectation that that's what's going to happen. I think we need to look at the job descriptions and understand what's going on before.
You're right. I made an assumption. I apologize. the feedback I've gotten from staff regarding their classifications of their job descriptions versus what they're doing lends me to believe that there's going to be some upward forces on that 170, but that, we'll see, I
It could
guess.
go either
And
way.
it could, I mean, factually, it could go either way. Intuitively, I'm expressing myself.
Commissioner Swallowson, you've been in this business, if you will, a long time, even though you've been just serving a couple of years as commissioner. I'm interested in your perspective.
Well, one of the largest differences that I see in doing it from the private sector, and particularly the one that I was in, was that we in the nuclear industry knew that we basically would survive or we would cease to exist as a group, right, after the 3 Mile Island accident. So we shared a tremendous amount of information. Even, I mean, we knew what other companies paid their people and this type of thing. And so it was actually, comparables were fairly easily determined, right? And so you could go do that. And what you were doing and how you were doing it, they're pretty similar, right? Because it's so highly regulated, you don't get out of step or you get in trouble, right? So those types of factors made that, as I review it now, it actually made those much more simple to pull together and compare. And then you really did feel like you were very close to apples comparisons. There's always little deviations here or there based on geography of where they were or what state regulations or additional things they required, but not that much. So really what it came down to, and my feedback to the group when they began, was it all comes down to your comparable counties. The whole thing is built on how do you come up with your data, right? And it needs to be seen not only from the group's perspective, from the leadership, but also, and more importantly, quite frankly, from the employees' perspective. They got to feel like they're being treated fairly. So that was really a big driver as to why this was seen as different from what's been done before, is because we really encouraged to get everybody involved, and that helps everyone in the organization. No, not every employee was involved, but enough employees were involved so that they could have discussions and go back and talk to their groups and see what's being done and are we being treated fairly in this review, right, as it's coming out. So is it a little different from what people may have seen in the past? Yeah. Yeah, it is, and it was intentional that it'd be different. But then you do lean heavily, as you're hearing, on the statistical analysis. And it's tougher to even make the case to look at it because, as you know, Commissioner Hawkins is pointing out, well, some of this doesn't align up directly. You know what I mean? This doesn't make sense. And the public perspective of, I'm seeing counties use that, I'm sorry, what in the world are we even looking there for, right? Well, I hope this discussion today helps to enlighten or at least help educate a little bit as to, if you put them together, it isn't that you're trying to match the highway engineer position to the highway engineer position in Hennepin County. You know, because again, that's not, even though the job responsibilities, you know, as far as what they're doing, the scope of what they're doing and those types of things being so much drastically different, the number of employees working for them, all of those come into effect. So you have to have those modifiers put in there if you're going to use them, to your point. If you're going to use those, that's fine, but you have to be able to have a modifier to make it realistic for Cook County. And I guess in my discussion with the groups and such, I believe that the contractor we used did that, factored that into the analysis to make sure that we weren't skewed too far out, you know, but that's my perspective. That's all it is just my perspective. And I'm trying to point out why this one's actually more complex than the ones I was involved with in the past, you know, just by the nature of it and by the nature of our county, and when you factor in all the things that Commissioner Mills spoke of.
Mm-hmm. Commissioner Hawkins?
Yeah, I thank you for your perspective that you've been through this before. It's my first time. So I appreciate. But speaking to the county engineer here, the county engineer in Hennepin. So I take the raw data that came from DDA and I say, okay, well, let's just take out the engineer and the county attorney and some of those higher level positions that I personally don't think compare, but I don't know. That's my opinion. Changes the numbers. I could, actually, towards the end, I cut all of the counties that were higher than St. Louis County. I left St. Louis County in because it's close to us. Any county that was higher, I got us to 99% across the board. We're at 99% of wages. Makes me think, because some of these positions are skewed to the higher level positions. That's where we're taking our data from.
Okay.
It gives me pause to think, all I have to do is do that, and it changes the numbers. That's why I'm saying, my first time,
Yeah.
it's not my job. But if I can do that, I think it gives pause to this process, to the data. We need to make sure the public is understanding this. I get it. I want to pay employees fairly. These are my colleagues. These are my friends. It's important to me. But when we're talking double-digit increases on future levies, I want to make sure we're doing it right and we are using good data. And I'm sorry, I appreciate your process. I appreciate the work that the committee did. I'm just not a believer yet.
Commissioner Swan?
Yeah, the only thing I would, in listening to your discussion, the only thing I would look closely at is Commissioner Mills made the point of, yes, but if you take out all of those other counties, then the process basically just went out the window because there was a reason they were there. Maybe it was that based on our economic issues or how we do things here, based on our cost of living, based on these things. So you'd have to look close. Just be sure before you take one out, you understand why it was selected in the first place, why that was there. So, because yeah, you're right. If you take the higher ones out, I'm sure it changes the data without a question. But do question why those were there in the first place. How did those get selected and brought in for review? Because sometimes with the economy as we have it here, with the cost of living as we have it here, housing, rentals, other things, if you look at something that the population density was brought up, and it's one that you just gravitate to that, right? It's like we're a small county. Only compare us to small counties, but many of our other small counties in Minnesota don't have the economy that we have here. They don't have the tourism that we have here. They haven't had as many people come in and buy up second homes and all of these types of things that have driven our cost of living up. So if you just compare there, you're not going to have a living wage for an employee here, is my concern. That's what I'm concerned about, with the cost of things as they are. That's really all that, So I haven't gone through it to the extent that you have. And I really appreciate you going through and doing that to challenge it and try to make sense that this really, that the study is right. I do appreciate that you've done that, but I think you would have to go through and really challenge, why is this one in here? And I think as we said before, to do that, you almost have to sit down with the people that have the model, right? From the contract group that we had, because they're the only ones that are going to be able to tell you what the algorithm is that would have taken this and said, okay, this is here and this is why this number is okay. I don't know that we would be able to have a meaningful conversation because I would have an opinion only because I don't know what the algorithm, how it was built to pull it in.
Part of the subtext here, I think, is that, there's a belief that we should only look at small counties. And I get that.
Yeah.
Because that feels like intuitively, that feels like yeah, those are our peers. But we started the conversation not talking about, well, what county should we pull in? We talked about these factors, and that was the driver for the selection of the counties. And so you're right. I mean, if you start saying, okay, I don't think this one belongs in the set, well, then you have discounted the selection of those factors. And, you know, we can, I mean, we could do a study where we just look at small counties, and it would yield a completely different result. But we chose the factors we did because we felt they were important and because they reflect the way our community looks.
And I think it's really important to look at the study as a whole. And in my work with wages, and this is in an educational setting, we tried to look for those key factors. We just didn't look at size of our school district. So to me, looking at the study as a whole is a really critical piece. And yes, the job descriptions aren't all perfect. Nothing ever will be perfect, whether we do it this year or 3 years from now. But we need to work with the data that we have, and I think the study as a whole that we have. Commissioner Mills.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just as far as population is concerned, the whole group understood that. I mean, that's why we chose a ratio of expenditures to population, and that is the factor, not population, because that, it just isn't fair. It's not accurate. You can't get that good comparison, and everyone recognized we can't pay what the big counties pay. I also just want to say we can't pick and choose, taking some positions out. If you start doing that, again, it throws out the whole process. Also, longevity is a huge factor in this, and we're talking about a pay table, you know. So longevity is outside of the table. That's a different policy. We're talking about updating the pay table, and so if you start taking out this or that or the other thing, you should also take out longevity, and you know, you just go down this rabbit hole forever. So really what we're trying to do is be as systematic and fair as possible, as open as possible, and involve staff, because that was a huge piece of feedback we got during negotiations was the previous study. Also, the public did not like the previous study, and so we've tried to be as public as we can with this one. You know, you haven't had the opportunity yet to be involved in negotiations, but there is a whole other perspective in that process too. So I would encourage you to be involved in that in the future.
And I believe there's an opportunity for that.
Couple of years?
Not what I really want to do, but, because I get, it's hard. And like I said, these are my friends we're talking about, ultimately. But really, I'm talking about jobs right now. I am not talking individuals. This is jobs. And when we...
Classes? Can we talk about classes?
No, I'm talking jobs, because on my data here, it doesn't have a class, so I don't know what the class is, maybe, technically. But speaking of comparing and using, not picking and choosing, I did ask Tessa, DDA, wait a minute, for this job, you've got mostly metro counties that you're using as your comparison. For this job, you're using mostly smaller counties. What gives? Well, we didn't have data for the other ones. To me, that's a red flag. Why? What does it mean about our job here that we can't get the same data from the same counties for similar jobs and departments even? I mean, look at the custodian and the maintenance director, and wait a minute, you got a maintenance director, but you don't have any custodians. That's why I'm saying I am leery of the data that was given to me to analyze, to say, this wage table makes sense. So it makes me feel like this was geared to the upper level jobs. And that's, let's just say it then, if that's what it is. I get it, but I don't think they're comparable across the board in Cook County to Hennepin.
Madam Chair. So the data set that we used came from the League of Minnesota Cities. They do an annual salary survey, and it's of cities and counties. And so that is the source for information about salaries in public sector jobs in the state. There is not another alternative. I mean, that is really the only data set that we can lean on to do this kind of analysis. And the manner in which jurisdictions report varies. I mean, they have, we were talking about how in some jurisdictions, you may have an emergency manager who's actually a sheriff's deputy, right? And so, there's not a designated emergency manager position. And so that person's going to show up as a sheriff's deputy, and you're not going to have a comp for an emergency manager. That function exists, but the job doesn't. And so there are variations like that across jurisdictions that lead to variations in the number of comparable jobs that are pulled into any single job description. And I just think it's important to understand that.
That's a good explanation. Commissioner Mills.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. And Commissioner Hawkins, it's the second time that you brought up the leaning towards the higher end jobs. And at our last meeting, Assessor Thompson pointed out that that's the opposite of what's happening, actually. It's the lower end that gets that bigger benefit than the higher end. And the higher end is still significant, but I just wanted to point that out for the second time.
Well, I'll point out, when I took out the higher end jobs, it made the lower end, it made everybody more equal.
Sure.
So,
What if you took out longevity?
well, I don't think that's a good idea. But if you want to propose that to the committee, go ahead. But
Well, I'm saying if you start picking and choosing, why not pick and choose that to look at? If you're going to start hacking up the data, it's important to look at it
no,
wholly.
I was just looking at our comparable counties. That's
Right.
all I was looking at,
Right.
taking note. Positions.
And compared to us. And so what I'm trying to say is, if you're going to start hacking at that and taking some parts out, where do you draw the line about the other parts that you're not going to take out and look at? That's why you have to look at the whole. Otherwise,
Okay. I think we're arguing the same point. Look at the whole, look at the small counties along with, don't tell me you're looking at 20 counties and then give me 6 that are mostly metro. To me, that doesn't feel fair. That picking and choosing,
for one position, right?
there's multiple. Okay. The data's here.
Yeah. And so when you look at the whole instead of just that one position, or 2 positions, or 3 positions, when you look at all the positions, that's what we're trying to compare.
But we don't have data for all the positions. That's what I'm saying.
Well, and we never will, because
Yeah.
every county is different. We
So-
need to look at it as a whole.
So DDA picked and choose for us. That's what happened. I mean, this, yeah, anyway.
I'm going to push back on that a little bit, because I don't think there was picking and choosing. I think they had a data set to work with, and they pulled in the data that were relevant to each job. So it's not like they were, oh, well, let's throw this one out, let's keep this one. I think they pulled in the data that they had to work with.
Commissioner Storley.
Thank you. I'm just thinking from a 30,000 viewpoint of looking at the whole thing. We're talking about our jobs here. The state demographer on her website at various times tells us that in the next 10 years, there will be a huge retirement in the state, and the younger folks are not looking specifically for maybe the jobs that we have because of the wages. So I think we need to think broader, we need to think out into the future, because, 1, we're end of the road. 2, our housing is not all that great if and when we do need new people for a period of time. And so I think we need to look at it from a broader and higher standard and viewpoint, because the facts are the people that are available to work are getting less.
Commissioner Mills.
I appreciate that, because I've been hearing the same thing and I've been witnessing the same thing, and that's why I say I think it's our greatest risk as an organization. So I want to address our greatest risk, and doggone it, it's expensive. There's no doubt about that. And then the conversation goes to, how do we pay for this? Public comment, absolutely. If we're going to implement it now, well, we still got to pay for it if we're paying out of reserves. That's absolutely true. If we don't implement it now, we're going to have to implement it later. Like, it's a horse apiece. It's just, how are you going to strategically manage that increase of dollars? And I think we can do it, and I do think there's other dollars that we're going to be able to lean on, and I want to minimize the burden on taxpayers, but I also want to, again, strategically make our organization in a good position to move into the future. It's just, it's big stuff.
Other questions, comments? Somebody want to take a stab at a motion?
Madam Chair, I'd make the motion to approve the compensation study working group recommendation to raise county 2023 pay rates to 95% of market as shown in the attached pay table.
Thank you, Commissioner Mills. Is there support? Is there support? Is there support? Motion dies. So would someone like to make another motion?
Well, Madam Chair, the reason I don't support the motion right now is I haven't heard how we're going to go about doing that.
Excuse me, could you speak a little louder?
I apologize. Thank you for the feedback. The reason I didn't support the motion, just to put it on the table so we could have the further discussion, was I guess I was thinking we were going to have some discussion that if you were to move forward with something like this, how would you propose that it would be paid for? Right now, maybe you may tell me that's a separate conversation, but I would feel better about understanding that piece before I would just agree to go forward. That's just me personally. I need to hear that, a little more discussion, I guess.
Commissioner Mills?
Madam Chair, I apologize. That's
okay.
That's a wonderful point, and of course, I'm making assumptions and jumping ahead, and but I think that's absolutely important to talk about ahead of time. And so there we go.
I want
Open that up,
I
huh?
want you to not feel supported, but I think that's a critical piece to have a discussion on before we make a decision whether we're really prepared as a board to move forward.
Thank you. My feelings don't matter in this, but thank you.
They matter.
All right, so maybe we want to look back a little bit at the fund balance analysis that Auditor Powers provided us.
Madam Chair, one item I didn't include in that I think is relevant, in that 4.3 million, that's in 2021. They said the positive trend in 22, but we're proposing to use 1.1 million of that, so I think we should factor that in. Call it 3.2 million rather than 4.3.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a large number to subtract right off the top there. And Madam Chair, if I might,
Please.
Commissioner Mills, you said there were some other funds that you at least had in mind that, might possibly come into play.
Not funding.
Funding sources or things. If you could share anything or what your thoughts are there, then maybe we can come around to because if you take it directly out of the fund balance, okay, you're good for a year. Certainly not a sustainable thing as you go forward, because, and that's, as I leave this board, that's something I would look at as well, because with that large a number, you're certainly, the comment made earlier about a double digit would be almost a guarantee. Yeah, I could certainly see that, So I think that's why, how do we phase this in, or is there a method that could be done?
Commissioner.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Commissioner Swalson. again, I'm making assumptions here. And so that's
Sure,
not.
we're just talking.
Yeah, and that's not necessarily fair or guaranteed. But as I shared previously, I really do believe that those PILT payments from the boundary waters are going to be coming in our favor. Right now, that's set aside, and we're not factoring that into anything.
Okay.
But it is included in this 3.2, is that, or is it not?
It's,
Because that's.
it's not in
Okay.
the 3.2.
Okay, so that's not,
That's still in his back pocket,
yeah, good. Let's keep it there for.
to pay back if needed.
Yeah, yeah. It's not ours, but I do think it's gonna go in our favor, and, again, if we're looking at straight data, it's gonna go way up, but I don't think Congress is gonna be, willing to.
Skeptical as I
Yeah,
can be on
I don't think Congress is gonna be able to swallow that, so,
Right.
that's gonna be a process, but that's another battle. And the other is, straight up that 1% sales tax. That's gonna be, being paid off, and then that's gonna go into the general fund. And that's years down the road, but I see that as a substantial, amount of money that we can use to cushion the harm, or the cost, the pain of taxpayers, and to replenish fund balance. Perhaps that's not fair to assume, and Brady, if you have any.
He's doing some
It's-
quick figuring.
Yeah,
Well,
I saw a pained look on his face for
No.
just a moment.
no, not really. No, it's hard to count that. It's a favorable, very favorable trend as of right now. I
Okay.
mean, we are building up funds to pay those off potentially early in around 2027, but there's a lot of factors. You can pay it off as early as you can, or you can run it out to the end. Whatever's left, you get to use. So, I mean, there's a lot of factors. A couple of years from now, it'll probably be a more relevant discussion, but yeah, that potential's out there, for sure.
Commissioner Mills.
So, Madam Chair, we're now talking instead of 4.3, we're talking 3.2. Is that the understanding as far
Right.
as our fund balance is concerned?
Correct.
And so, assuming we just hit it right now, and assuming the board approves the 95%, that is $1 million, and so that would bring the fund balance down to 2.2 million. Where would that leave the health of things? And I'm just concerned that we haven't included the highway department engineer and PHHS director in that conversation. I know it's all one pot of money. I really like the idea of fragmenting it and keeping it assigned for what we intended to. But again, me seeing the greatest risk to the organization being this right here, I want to look at that.
Yeah, I mean, current trends are positive. That's the best I can say. And the BWCA money, that's unknown. You know, so we've had, you always have to keep in mind, the recession they've talked about for years is long overdue. It keeps getting pushed off. Is it going to happen? Your guess is as good as, better than mine.
I don't think that's true.
Because, well, I've already guessed it was coming, so I've been wrong several times.
Madam Chair?
Commissioner Salas.
As I understand it, we do have ARPA funds coming next year and the following year.
Correct.
What are the guidelines for use of any of that funding?
This would be an eligible use.
It would be an eligible use? And my only thought with that was just a thought that part of that, I certainly would still want to aim some of that at, other activities for improvements that we would want to do, but part of that, so all of this amount wouldn't have to go on the levy next year if you have these other funds that are available for not just next year, but the following year. And as I understood it, that was a little over $1 million next year and a little over $1 million
Correct.
the following
That's correct.
year.
Yeah.
So that would at least give you a, a glide path, so to speak, if you were going to use some of that. But that's a decision that,
Commissioner Mills?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Commissioner Swanson, for bringing that up too. Yes, that's another substantial, and that's on top of the ARPA funds we've already received that we're been committing to our housing initiatives. So I was hoping that we could put more towards housing
That
with
was
that, but as
exactly
I've,
my thought. I was hopeful,
Yeah.
and really, I think it will be needed.
yeah, oh, absolutely, and our capital improvement plan. That's also
Yeah.
going to be a significant cost that we're looking at. So in my mind, I'm factoring all these things in, looking at our potential funds, looking at our potential risks, and trying to, and looking at the taxpayers and what burden that's going to put on them, and just trying to balance all that out. But between the ARPA and that's, I guess, a guarantee, right? Versus the PILT and the potential 1% down the road. So, and then if we can incrementally shift for levy dollars, because we do not want to rely operating dollars on these one-time monies. That's, so, in a phased implementation for the levy.
Phased and very strategic.
And I'd start with, well, we can't do any now,
Correct.
you know?
Well,
So,
effectively, we had some discretionary left. It wasn't a large amount.
Yeah.
We had, I think it was 180,000 or
Yeah.
thereabouts. Was that right, Greg?
194.
194, thank you.
Oh.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So there's a piece of it that you know, but that's all it was.
chipped away at,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
We've got fund balance, PILT, potential 1%, and additional ARPA dollars.
And from the glass half full, we have the potential recession. All the factors that led to the crash 2008, I read, most of them are still not that housing, but there may be other bubbles building. There hasn't been substantial correction of the whole system. And climate change, the effects of that on state, federal funding availability.
This sounds half empty, not half full.
Right,
Okay.
that's me, yeah.
I would vote for a different glass.
A narrower glass.
I just stated, it was kind of an aside, but I said I would vote for a different glass. Okay.
Other questions or comments? So given our discussion of looking at the 3.2 million PILT, potential 1% and the additional ARPA, now would you like to make a motion, Commissioner Mills?
Certainly, Madam Chair, I'd make the motion to approve the compensation study working group recommendation to raise county 2023 pay rates to 95% of market as shown in the attached pay table.
Thank you. Is there support?
I'll support.
Thank you, Commissioner Swanson.
We'll bring it to a discussion and vote anyway.
All right. So we have a motion and support. Do we have further discussion? Any further discussion? Not? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
Motion carries 4-1. All right. Move down to County Commissioner's salary and schedule of per diems.
This is going to be a long one.
Need a break?
Might need a couple
Should we
minutes.
take a
I need-
5-minute break,
I
everyone?
need 1 minute, yeah.
Yeah, 10 minutes. Let's take 10 minutes.
Unless you were going to make a motion right away and we could just be done.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Cook County Board of Commissioners meeting. We are now still with Auditor Powers, but we're moving on to item C, which is County Commissioner salaries and schedule of per diems.
So, Madam Chair, this is on the agenda because any change to county commissioner salaries has to take place in the prior year. So, State Auditor recommends that we take a positive action, even if we're going to leave it the same. Just make a motion as to the same or whatever the change would be. And I've showed last meeting, so we looked at last year, the first increase since 2003, 3% increase. And I showed what would it look like if you took the 3.5% COLA that was approved for the unions this year. Not to suggest you do that, but this is what it would look like and cost about 4,000, where is it? Anyway, a little over 4,000.
All right, and I know we've done some other analysis in addition to looking just at the salary with the COLA. Commissioner Mills gathered data from comparable counties and looked at salaries. And anything as you were gathering your data, Commissioner Mills, that stood out and surprised you?
Well, the only reason I did the comparables there was, Commissioner Hawkins asking if we're doing that for staff, why not do it for commissioners? Truly what I would rather lean on, and for the record, I also did all counties. And just did the average of 95% of that. Truly what I would like to lean on is, again, CPI. That is the only, in my mind, set of data that we can look at year after year after year and trust that that's happening. That's how you calculate inflation. That's how I think we should calculate COLA. That's how I think we should calculate COLA for commissioners. And so what I did was looked at the historical CPI for the last 20 years, starting from 2023 when the last update was done, and calculated that all out, adding the CPI each recurring year. And that brought us to this last year's 6.9% CPI, which is the greatest, is my understanding, in like 40 years or something crazy. But another alternative is to use all those as an average, 2.2. And you can see that it goes down to roughly the same amount, that 34,500. One other factor that I wanted to point out is the cost of health insurance since 2003. In 2018, we had the switch from the county covering nearly all of the premiums to having that 80-20 split. And so if you add that cost in for a single, that's an assumption, but on the lower end, to try to be conservative with all this, that would be $3,625 for the total out of pocket for a single payer. Taking that, adding it to that 34,550 would get 38,175. So a lot of data there to look over, and just really was hoping to get some feedback from commissioners and thoughts about the data and how what is the best way to do something now as well as into the future.
Commissioner Svalson.
So I think we heard some feedback at the beginning of the meeting as well from the folks, and really, so being the commissioner who's leaving the position, I will just, from the optics perspective, just share that, there are some that are going to look at this, and if you use the CPI data in particularly, Commissioner Rails, that's a large increase in their, that will be probably not taken real favorably, but I think you've described it, adequately and made a case for it, but I just think that's going to be something that I think we'll get a negative feedback. In fact, I'm certain it will. The other piece I guess I would share is just that, they're going to look at this from the fact that each just ran knowing what the compensation package and everything is, and ran for the office and wanted the office, and, well, you have it. So, but in the essence of fairness, the cost of living aspect of it was something that I looked at, you know what I mean? And then that's what we did last year. What'd you say, Brady, it was like 2.5 last year?
Yeah, the percentage,
Yeah.
right.
And I mean, it's one of those, I don't think people begrudge anyone for getting a cost of living adjustment to things, when you're doing it, because it's reflective that things are getting more expensive and things are going on. And that's why I look at it more personally. I guess that's how I thought we were looking at this. And then when you offered up the large, based on the CPI and things, that was one that just struck me as, that's just probably, particularly in the timing of things for what we're doing and taking a large part of the fund balance and other things like that, just probably not something that would be digested well by the community. Or me personally, I just was like, it was hard.
Other reactions? Commissioner Sturl?
I agree with Commissioner Svelson. It was kind of like, whoa, this is, even though nothing has been done since 2003, I, at this point, feel that it's something that we can discuss in the future, but I don't think the timing is good right now.
Commissioner Mills?
Madam Chair, I want to bring up that I brought this forward last year as well. The timing was not well. Next year, we're going to be trying to make up for the compensation study. The timing will not be well. My point is that the timing is never good. The timing is never good to increase costs, but this is the reality. And I believe in a leadership position, it should be compensated more than poverty wages for our area. And I think for the amount of consumption the job requires, that it is still not worth it. None of us are doing it for the money. But I want to be able to, do the job as well as I can without having to compromise the job or my livelihood. Like, I can make it following the CPI. I've done that math. And I'm very well positioned in general with my skills and abilities, experience in the community. And so I think it's pretty outrageous for the health of the board that we're not keeping up, and we haven't been for 20 years. It's not that even though we haven't done it in 20 years, it's because it hasn't been done in 20 years that we're in this position. And so when I see something wrong, I don't just accept it. I try to improve it. So I was elected seeing deficiencies in the county. Do I just accept those deficiencies? No. I try to improve them and make them right. And I believe I've made quite the data case to show. I mean, I'm looking at the data. If you can explain to me anywhere in the data why that should not be the case, and I even did as low as conservative as possible. It's just a matter of timing and public perception. They don't know what's involved in the job. They don't know the sacrifices, the time. You get it from all sides. There are no peers. We are the only peers we have, other than AMC, and they're in different counties in different situations. So I'm a little incredulous. I understand the heartburn it gives, and I also want to point out the small, though significant, amount of money we're talking about for the 5 of us.
I understand.
So if anyone can point to the data and say this is why, then I will very easily accept that. But if we're not going to be operating off of data, I'm really concerned.
And you're right, the data is one thing, but at the other time, that's why I'm only giving the council from the perspective of the optics piece of it, because I think the feedback will be much harsher than you're anticipating. And optics are everything when it comes to these positions.
I've had plenty of threats.
And Dave, this is just one of those that, having dealt in a community and in an employment where you always had to consider how it would be consumed by the public around you.
Absolutely.
It's a key piece, and that's why it's so ingrained in me, I guess, that, I'm always going to bring it up. As a board, we can still make the decision as we see appropriate. I just want to make sure it's considered.
Absolutely. I absolutely recognize the repercussions in the optics of it. Again, it never looks good. Never. And it's only going to look worse as time goes on. We're not dealing with business as it comes up, and it's digging us into a hole.
And I also think, from my perspective, that our board needs to reflect our community, which means younger people, people with families, not so many gray-haired people. And I also think it's reasonable to expect that a county commissioner can earn a living on their wage. And that would be very challenging, and is very challenging for us. The one thing I would like to do, I'm very much in favor of looking at the Consumer Price Index. That's also a metric, if you will, that I look at. And looked at the CPI inflation calculator even last night, just to double check things. And I am willing to support that kind of direction for our salary, but I am willing to do so only if we have more equity between the work that commissioners do. And we've collected a lot of information over the last week, and this will be a discussion, obviously, at our organizational meeting in January. But I want to keep in mind that our districts have been recreated recently so that there is a similar number of people, a very close number of people in each of our districts, and we are working for them. And that system has been designed to be equitable for people. And I think the work that we do should be equitable as well. Commissioner Mills.
I also just, philosophically, in order for people to thrive and to do their best, they need to be able to have the space for that. And as I mentioned before, in the current wages, any commissioner who is either not retired or does not have a business that they don't need to be hands-on every day is really able to run for office. And to your point of not being a good representation, I think that's absolutely a risk. And of course it's personal because we're talking about our wages, but I want to point out I'm also thinking about the next board and the next board and the next board, and this is just not. I mean, we look at other counties here, and it's just not in a good spot, and it's a matter of taking the Band-Aid off, or when's the next time? It might just fester for longer.
It might be another 20 years.
It wouldn't surprise me.
Mm-hmm.
I guess just for the public record too, I should point out that when we look at the averages of our comparables, that would be $51,800 for a commissioner's salary. What we just approved for compensation for staff was a 95% of market. That would bring it down to $49,181. If you look at the average of all counties in the state, that's at $32,893. 95% of that would be $31,247. Currently, we are sitting at 24,000-ish. And since 2003, the position has also incurred the costs of health insurance, which on the low end, the very lowest would be $1,850 for the year, and then at the highest for total out-of-pocket as well as family coverage would be $8,200. So again, do you want to encourage families to to be able to run for this position, or just individuals? Do you want to encourage a diverse group of people? Do you want to enable leaders to grow and thrive, or do you want them to scrape by and just struggle with the rest?
Commissioner Hawkins.
So basically, we're talking about $35,000 that we haven't budgeted for, correct? Am I correct in your figuring?
I believe if we were to increase it to that 34,000, it's a difference of 10,000, and so that's about 50,000, or if not 60.
And are you proposing this comes out of fund balance?
I'm proposing this comes out of our contingencies that we had budgeted this year.
Didn't we just use that up? We used that up in our last motion. We have nothing left of that.
It wasn't clear to me in that motion that we were using all of that. What I understood is we were using some of that, as well as ARPA, as well as potential PILT, and those different opportunities. So, again, when is a better time? Last year, the year before that, there has not been a good time. Next year, no way. The year after that, no way. Never a good time. It's just what is the right thing to do.
So I'd like to just double check one figure, and it was the average for Minnesota counties. It's 31,247, correct?
That's 95% of the average.
Right.
The average is 32,893. And that's on the low end. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 counties that didn't have 2022 figures. So I just extrapolated whatever the latest was, assuming they did not change it.
Mhm.
So this average is guaranteed on the low end. And again, we're at 24,000.
So I'd make a motion to propose the salary of $31,247 for a commissioner's salary in 2023. And that would be 95% of the average.
I'll support that, Madam Chair.
So we have a motion, we have support. Is there discussion? Commissioner Mills.
Just want to point out that my preference would be to the low end of following the CPI. But I recognize that you can't get everything you want, and you got to compromise, and this is a step in the right direction. So I appreciate the motion. I appreciate everyone's critical thinking on this, and the difficulty that it presents.
And I hope that it's not the last motion in this direction for another 20 years. Other discussion? Commissioner
I'd
Hawkins.
just like to say I still am, Larry, for the same discussion as last time of basing my work off of somebody in a city. There is just no comparison. My job, yes, it was stressful this last week. I'll admit that. I've got lots of phone calls. I admit that. But comparing my job to Hennepin County Commissioner, two different, totally balls of wax. And actually, I had a conversation 3 months ago with Keith Nelson, St. Louis County. We were at a meeting together, and we started talking about comparisons, and I was like, whoa, really glad I'm not you. So there is that balance there. I get 20,000 for this job. Yeah, you're right. I feel for you. You have to be in a certain position to be able to do this, and that's not fair. But I also can't compare myself to $100,000. And I just don't think that's fair when we're talking averages to put that in, so.
Commissioner Mills?
Yeah, I think that's the beauty of the average, right? You're not just comparing yourself to Hennepin County, but that's why I lean so much on the CPI. And that is, if you follow the CPI, it would be more than the average, and so that's why I'm
Yeah.
reluctant, but like, okay, well, the average, sure, okay, that's a step in the right direction.
So the calculation I looked up for the CPI inflator looked at 36,692. You know, so this is less. Quite a bit. Other remarks or comments, questions? All right, are all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Motion fails.
Madam Chair, if I may, I would just like to ask the commissioners, where do you see the future of the board going?
Madam Chair,
Go right ahead.
Thank you.
Commissioner
I do agree with you that it's never going to be a perfect time, but I don't think you can find a worse time to ask for a pay raise than right now.
I'd say the pandemic was the worst time.
I would disagree. Because of where things were in the fund balance and everything else, there was uncertainty. But when we just did what we did for the employees, and I'm always going to say, if the employees need it, then give it to the employees. Give it to the employees.
We certainly did, Madam Chair, and I just want to point out the difference between the black swan and the gray rhino. We see this gray rhino coming. The black swan was during the pandemic, and that was something you weren't sure what was going on.
Commissioner Mills, I agree with you. My point being, I keep coming back to the optics. I know you got to be sick of hearing it. But you just ran for the office. You knew what the job was. You knew what it would take to do the job. You knew exactly how much it compensated you. But you ran for the job.
Saying that I would want to raise wages.
You just did.
Yeah.
And I understand that. You said that.
Yeah,
So your position is well known.
sure.
But for the board to support it at this time, when you just ran for the office, did you run for it because you just wanted to give yourself a pay raise? That's how it's going to be viewed. I'm just,
What I would like is for us, this clearly didn't pass, but I would like a commitment to then do this next year. A commitment for those of us that will still be here, because there is never a good time. And it's been 20 years, except for the little bit we had last year. And I don't want it to go another 20 years. I want to replace myself with some young person who's got a family, who's committed to Cook County for another 20 years. I'm not doing this for me. I'm not making this suggestion for me. And I hope all of us think about that. If not today, after the first of the year, let's talk about this so that it's in place for 2024. Commissioner Storley.
Thank you. Well, this morning, my heart was with the employees. Being a business person, I always made sure that my employees were well taken care of. The small amount that we had, we wanted to keep them. And so I feel right now this is bad timing. I would like to address it again in the future, not maybe in January, but let's put it on our agenda for some time next year to really, really look at this. But my heart was with the employees this morning.
Commissioner Mills.
Madam Chair, I'd like to also pull out the commissioner assignments. And just note that maybe the pain I'm feeling is the 29% of the weight I've been carrying. And so if you don't want to talk about adjusting salaries, let's talk about adjusting per diems.
Well, I do think we need to wait till we have the new commissioner in January 3rd, because there's certainly a lot of adjustment that we can do, definitely. I do think that there is, with you and another district, an overabundance of commitments that maybe last year was with enthusiasm of, I'll do that, I'll do this, without the idea that, oh my gosh, what have I gotten myself into? Now, any of my alternates with people I've never used, but then I do have extra duties that I can add more stuff to it, but I don't think now is the time to adjust the commissions and boards. Right now, we need to wait for the new commissioner to look it over. I believe she has a list.
Commissioner Mills.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'm sorry, Commissioner Sterling, that I didn't clearly state my intentions. I'm talking about adjusting per diems, not assignments.
Oh, okay.
And so,
Okay.
and to Commissioner Swauson's point, I knew exactly what I was getting into. I knew exactly what challenges we're facing, and I know exactly how I want to address them. So I have a vision for the future of the county, and that's why I'm asking you, commissioners, what do you see the future of the board? And what I'm hearing is you can't see the future. You're just looking right now and how it looks now.
I don't agree with you on that.
Well, please share.
The future of the board. I think the future is the board to represent who elected us, working together to solve and to juggle all the new things that come up. I'm looking at our Arrowhead region. We have so many retirees. I don't know who's going to run some of those boards and commissions. So I've been asked to run for a couple of them, you know, only because I have the years and I'm still here. So, you know, we can weigh ourselves heavily with a lot of stuff, but it needs to be fair in the per diem, for sure. But I don't have any opinion right now. What would you like to talk about, Commissioner Mills, with the
About
per
the-
diem?
Well, my suggestion would be 200 for a per diem instead of 100.
Commissioner Hawkins, you had your hand up.
I was just going to share, I didn't support going to your motion, going to the top and making it right. I understand the rationale, and I appreciate the work you did with the data. But I think I'll advocate for this the same way I did for the employees. I would like to see a more phased-in approach. And so, you know, I will make a motion that we increase our salaries, $3,000 each across the board for '23.
Support.
Commissioner Mills.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Commissioner Hawkins, for the motion. Could you just kind of explain more of the path forward you see and the rationale for the 3,000?
I'll admit, I didn't do the math on it.
I'm okay with that.
I was just, okay, well, what's the difference? Where are we at? What's a compromise? So I wrote down 3, I wrote down 4, I wrote down 25. I chose 3. And I'm assuming keeping the per diems the same.
I don't agree with that amendment.
Okay. But we got the 3,000 first.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second to.
Point of order, I believe it's no longer.
Okay. So you're amending with,
I just made a $3,000.
all right, that's what I thought you were
That's what I made the motion for.
making your second, so you're withdrawing that, given the amendment. You want the amendment.
My
For per
understanding
diems.
is that it has not been amended. The
Okay.
motion is for 3,000
Just
only, and I seconded that motion.
Okay,
Right, that's
all right.
what I did.
Commissioner Mills?
Again, I appreciate that. A rounder number would be 3,600. That's 300 a month. My brain doesn't work for 3,000 divided by 12. Would you be open to amending that motion?
600, okay, so, yes, I would be willing to amend that motion to
So we have
3,600.
3,600.
And I'll support
Commissioner.
that.
And we have support. Discussion. Any discussion?
I'm sure. I'd also like to point out that so happens to cover the increase in out-of-pocket health insurance for individuals. So there's a
Maybe
couple
that's where I
numbers
live.
going together here, and I think that just means it's in the stars.
All right, so we have a motion and a second. Any more discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 3-2. Auditor Powers, you're done.
Oh, Madam Chair, point of order. We actually did not set the per diem specifically.
Oh, all right.
And so, Madam Chair, if I may, my complaint, again, and Commissioner Stroley's absolutely right, this is not the time to do reassignments. But my complaint is that here, the chair and the vice chair amounts have not been altered either, so I don't know if that's something that's just added on to the 36, I assume, as is. But those positions also take significant more time, significant more work, mostly in preparation for these meetings to get the team all on the same page. So I haven't been doing that this year whatsoever, but have been the last previous 2 years. And so this year, I've only been doing 29% of the assignments, or the time, not the assignments, the frequency of meetings, or however you guys, the composite total points. And just knowing, moving into the future, and looking into 2 and 3 years ago, how that number might change as far as workload is concerned. And so that's why I advocate for a higher per diem amount. I understand $200 is way more than $100, but that number was as an alternative to raising our salaries to follow the CPI. So I'm very open to a smaller increase for per diems, but I think that is, if assignments cannot be divvied out equally, and scheduling is the greatest challenge there. So there is no guarantee there, the way I see it, for redistribution. But I think, considering all that, an increase of, say, like $25 would be helpful.
I'm doing the math the old way. Is there a second to that motion?
Oh, so moved, Madam Chair. I didn't.
Is there a second? I'll second that motion. Any further discussion? All in favor?
I'm sorry, Madam Chair. I just looking for perspectives here from other commissioners. If the $100 a day is adequate for the meetings that we cover. Sometimes there's 3 meetings in a day, sometimes there's only 1. Is that a good average coverage?
Commissioner Hawkins and I talked a little bit about that, because we each have days where we have 3 or 4 meetings. I think all of us do. And so given the fact that that occurs a couple times a month, 3 times a month, I'm okay with that. Personally, I think that's more of a scheduling issue and an issue of balance among commissioners, making sure that we all are sharing in the workload.
And I
Commissioner
just want
Hawkins.
to say, since we just gave ourselves a raise, I'm more apt to think, let's keep it at $100, and then in our January meeting, let's make sure this is more fair. Because you are doing a lot of the work. You shouldn't be doing 30% of the work when the rest of us are not doing that. So I think you should be thinking about what responsibilities do you have that you would be willing to give up to make it more balanced, that you don't have to feel like you're doing so much. And then, this is where Commissioner Sullivan and I talked the other day, let's keep track of how many times each of us do have multiple meetings in one day and are missing out on per diems that maybe other commissioners are. But that's going to take a commitment from us
Per data.
to track that. Because I tried to get it when I was doing, but we're
It's
not tracking it.
Yeah.
Because I agree with you, there could be an issue here.
Oh,
But
there-
until we have the data, I'm not comfortable saying that yet.
One of the things that, in the information that developed through our discussion was considering on that expense report that we turn in monthly, having a second page where we list what are the meetings that we attended, where there wasn't a per diem that was received because there isn't one available, and then on what days do you have duplicate meetings and listing those, or on the travel expense report, listing those, but no mileage, no per diem, just so we have that record and we're all being consistent in how we're reporting. But I think we need to work to be consistent in how we're collecting the information to make it valuable. Commissioner Smalls.
The only other thing I would bring up, when you talk about equity of work, you need to consider which of those meetings require you to travel and which of those you're doing with Zoom. Because, I can sit in my house and, do like our, Firewise meeting.
Yeah.
Doesn't even really disrupt my day. It's early enough in the morning, I do it, and I just go on and do all the things I want to do. However, when you were going down to Duluth, to the Northeast Regional Correction Center to do that meeting, that's your day. You spend the whole day there. Or when, you go out to the range to do an end club or something like that.
Yep.
So just keep that in mind, because it is, when you talk equity, $100 is the $100, but when you're traveling and you got a whole lot of windshield time, that's a whole different thing.
Yeah, 4 hours
Yeah.
of travel time for a
And
2-hour
and
meeting.
I've done meetings where I did travel and did 2 of them in the car, and one of them I attended. And that's okay, but you just need to know when you're trying to measure out, because sometimes when you look at the things on the paper, it just, it looks different than when you're actually out there trying to do it.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Madam Chair. I would just be a little cautious in how we report all this. I think for future commissioners, it's a plate full when you first come on. Takes you a couple years to figure all of us out. I would say maybe more voluntary to start with, because it's, I can go for days and then think back, okay, Monday I did 2, and then I spent 3 hours on Tuesday preparing for something else. I don't want it to become burdensome, is what my point is. It's good to know maybe ourselves what we do and periodically maybe turn it in, but with the amount that I think both of you commissioners have for meetings, that would be a lot extra. So I just caution how much we should do on that.
And I would just say if we don't have the data, we don't have the information, it's hard to have the discussion.
Well, there's a little data we have here. If you want to look at the total points versus the total costs, the total amounts awarded, you can see those comparisons and,
Right.
and where some of those multiple meetings overlap. It's not direct data, and that would be much more valuable, but gives you a little sense of how that happens now and then. Commissioner Swalson has a very strong point about the travel time. That's an incredibly huge difference.
Yeah.
But I would also say, I'm not looking for, the work that I do, I appreciate the willingness to distribute it, but I want to do more work. That is my whole thing. I want to be a stronger commissioner and do more for the community. I'm not looking to lighten my load with this job. I think all of us should be taking on more. We have so much more to do. And it drives me a little batty, just how it's going to be a lot of catch up and not staying on top of things and relearning and, there is no end to this job.
And that's the part I would like to be able to see each of us have a balanced load so that we can dive in and do policy development. We can think about the future of the organization. What kinds of things should we be doing right now so we're preparing our community for 20 years from now? And we don't get a lot of time to do that. And I just think if we balance the workload better, then all of us can engage in that a little bit. And that's my hope. But we'll see what our organizational meeting brings in January. See how our new commissioner feels as we take a look at this, but at least we have a starting point for discussion.
Step in the right direction.
Yep.
Madam Chair, just a reminder, you have a motion and a second on the table.
Yep.
What was the motion? I forgot.
125 is the motion.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Thank you.
Any other discussion? Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Fine.
Motion fails.
I'll make a motion that we set the per diems for $100 for 2023.
Second?
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
Motion carries. All right.
All right, are we ready?
We are ready for you, Administrator Yorkie.
So this is going to require me to think, which I'm not sure I'm capable of at this point, but I'll do my best. So the only, well, it's not even an action item, it's an information item. We received a notice from our council for, on personnel matters, Quinlivan and Hughes, just notifying us of their rates. I just wanted to put that on the agenda for you so you'd be aware of it. We just need to sign the form and send it back. So I don't think it necessarily requires action, it's just for information. Any questions about that?
Madam Chair?
Commissioner Mills.
Is that, I'm sorry, I don't have the perspective. Is there change there, and to what extent does this affect our budget?
The budget impact is really unknown because we consult with them as needed. And those needs can vary significantly. So.
Thank you.
All right, just a couple other things, and briefly, because I know it's been a long morning / afternoon, we did have our CIP open house meetings on December 1st, and I should say capital improvement plan for the public's benefit. This is the plan for county buildings. How are we going to get our buildings up to snuff? And plan for future needs. And so we had 3 open house meetings on December 1st. Had about a total of 20 people in attendance. at those 3 sessions. And what we did was we presented the data that we had collected on county buildings and also talked about an overall condition index for our buildings. So in other words, how do they rate in terms of what kind of shape they're in and what their needs are. The participants gave us really good feedback. The idea was we wanted people to have a chance to look at the information before we actually start putting together the plan, because we wanted help from the public understanding what our priorities should be. I can certainly tell you what I think the priorities should be, but I think it's really important for the public to be involved in this process and to provide feedback. And so we'll be taking their feedback and having a second set of open house meetings, probably the 3rd week of February, and we'll set those dates here in probably the first part of January, to share the feedback that we got and also to let people know how that is informing the development of the plan. So the goal is to have the plan completed by the end of the first quarter. So we're on schedule to get that done. The only other item I had was had a conversation with Commissioner Svalson recently, and we were talking about strategic planning. I think it's been clear through our conversations throughout the year, things have been really busy, and we've had to back burner that effort, but we cannot be without a strategic plan. We need to understand what our strategic priorities are moving forward. So we'll be starting that process here next month. We are not going to be using outside consulting help with that. It'll be an internal process with input from department directors, supervisors, and frontline staff as needed. We're going to try to balance the need to have our staff engaged in this process, and you all, of course, with the need to just get things done. And so I want us to be nimble. I want our timeline to be fairly aggressive so that we can get a plan in place. The other thing is you don't just do a plan so that you can put it on the shelf and say, congratulations to us. There has to be a process for tracking progress toward goals. And so I envision a quarterly meeting of organizational leadership to check in with the plan, to go through each objective, each goal, to make sure that we're making progress. That plan will also inform the development of departmental plans, but the organizational plan is going to be kind of the umbrella, the guiding principles. So that is what is at the top of my priority list for the start of '23. And I just want to say it has been a real pleasure working with you all this year. Commissioner Svalson, again, sad to see you go. Have really appreciated your steady leadership. And just want to shout out our great staff who, we've talked about the amount of turnover that we've had in the past year. It's been a record year for turnover. And that puts a huge burden on staff. And it is tremendously difficult to have people coming and going and to ask your people to pick up the slack when that happens. And I know from talking with staff, there are a lot of folks feeling like, when is this going to stop? Really. And it causes a sense of fatigue that it's hard to say, well, we'll get through this and it'll be okay. Well, record year for turnover on top of last year's record year of turnover. So it's not slowing down. And so to the discussion about the compensation study, we need to do everything possible to create more stability, to kind of slow down those losses. I think the compensation, the pay plan update is going to help that. It's not enough by itself. Like Commissioner Mills said earlier, we need to have a culture where people feel supported, where they feel like their work is valued, where they can do work that has an impact on the community. And so creating that environment where people understand their relation to the larger whole and feel a sense of meaning in the work that they're doing, in providing services for Cook County residents is really important. And that's something that I've focused on a lot in the last year and will continue to focus on, because I think that cultural piece of it is super important. So thank you for all your support this year, and look forward to working with most of you next year. Thanks.
Thank you. Commissioner reports or any meeting updates? We have some correspondence. We've got our sales tax report and lodging tax comparison, and you and I will see each other at Firewise next week, one more time. And then we will next be together on January 3rd for our organizational meeting. Anything for the good of the order before I ask for a motion to adjourn? Is there a motion?
So moved, Madam Chair.
Support.
All right, we are adjourned. Everybody have a happy and safe holiday.